I've started going live to YouTube now too.
Oh,
So now
sick.
there's probably 2 different delays now.
Yeah.
So I'm just starting talking randomly more
Uh-huh.
often, and then hitting the button on LinkedIn. Happy Wednesday again. Man,
Happily
this has
Wednesday.
been happily Wednesday. Happily Hump Day HubSpot Wednesday.
Oh my God, Triple H.
We're talking quotes today with Max Cohen. How you doing, man?
Dude, I'm over the moon right now. I'm also very overwhelmed. But dude, I mean, it's a big day. I think, yeah, quote happily stuff is great. We'll talk about it. Obviously, it's why I'm here. But dude, you were live earlier today. Object library.
Object library.
We're going to
man.
talk about this quote happily stuff. I want to hear your reaction to object library, because when I saw it before, I knew there was one person in my brain that was like, oh, I know someone who's going to be very excited about this. And that person was you, Chris.
Oh, man.
Your jubilation today, this morning, for that cute little surprise that the HubSpot community got, giving just a little bit of a glimpse, a little taste into just the beginning of we'll call it the revolution of object data structure in HubSpot, right before inbound.
Yes, an open data model, and like this is, man, it's super exciting because it shows like, and there's gonna be people like me, like at the surface, you're like the functionality that you just get is like everything I've been looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you start moving through it and you can start connecting it to where they might go with it, you're like, oh, this is where it starts. Like getting to the point where it's like I open up my HubSpot portal for the first time, say I'm a manufacturer, and then all of the objects and properties and all this stuff gets created, including association labels. And showing people examples of that is going to be so powerful.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Here's what I'm unsure of. Are those objects customizable or no?
Yeah.
Are they okay? So they're not like locked into the schema that it gives you. It's just
it's
just saying like, while you can't create a custom object, you can create these objects and customize them and like activate them in your portal, right? And they're like HubSpot approved, like industry specific schema or something like that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and that was some of the feedback, like especially when we're targeting new users that come from other systems where they're not used to all the customizability, and you're like, okay, because like courses, for example, is an object, and when you go to the template, which requires Pro and above right now, it says there's an education template, and that's where courses exists, and it's like this is for K-12 and university, where you and I know full well that lots of people could take advantage of courses as an object. So what I shared is like, we just have to find the balance between somebody seeing that and be like, oh, that's not for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where this combination of templates, which is like, here's the object and here's the properties.
Yeah.
Versus just turning the object on.
Yeah.
And the thing that's super cool, and that it's not a custom object anymore, is like one of the pain in the asses of custom objects, especially if you're a partner trying to deliver similar experiences, or in your case, an app partner, especially with Event Happily, it's like every time you deliver it to a portal, it's got different IDs.
Yep.
And that makes everything harder.
Yep.
Now you can already see it in the settings. There's placeholders like for services, for appointments. And then when you go look at the placeholder, even though it hasn't turned on yet, you can see there's an ID up in the URL, and that's going to be the same for every portal.
Yeah.
And now I can make 6 CMS modules
that'll work
where you can just show any kind of object you want that's native and already has an ID, and it's just gonna it's exciting for sure.
It's sick.
And the cool thing,
universal IDs are going to be huge for app partners too. Eventually, I'm just going to say eventually, and I'm going to leave it there.
And the cool thing is that, like, they're going to move as fast as some people help them move on this, especially when it comes to what you want. Because right after, like, I thanked Harker for the call, and he's like, yeah, next one on the list is manufacturing. And I was like, dude, that's my background.
Yo,
like, shut the front door,
please.
Like, so
Let
it's
me
like, yep,
author that schema.
scheduling the next call right now.
Yeah. Don't do anything until I approve it.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So that's exciting, man.
Nicer. Yeah. Yeah. That stuff's sick, dude. I remember, like, all my years working over at HubSpot, something that, like, I commonly heard when they were talking about the sort of future and, like, vision for HubSpot and stuff is the concept of HubSpot 4X, right? Like HubSpot for healthcare, HubSpot for manufacturing, HubSpot for like, not white labeled, but, like, pre-built versions of HubSpot that had all this stuff kind of built in off the hop, right? And this is, like, the first realization of that concept, right? Where it's like, sure, you don't buy the product and it just comes like that, right? But, like, you get it and then you can configure it into a specific industry use case. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, easily have, like, most of the stuff you need, like, they're ready to go, versus, like, having this esoteric concept of, like, well, what constitutes as an object and what should be a property and how should we use contact, like, you know what I mean? And it just, like, says, here's the prescribed way of doing it based on, like, your particular use case of HubSpot, right? So it'll be really interesting to see how they, like, expand on that, right? And, like, what additional sort of template. I mean, I hate that we're calling another thing in HubSpot templates. Just gonna throw that out there in the universe. Call them, like, data models, or we already have some called data model. Call it a data build. I don't care. Templates is so overused, and I wish we had a different name for it.
It's data.
But
it's data templates.
I know,
that's how they're referring to it.
Yeah. But still, it's just template, event. It's so many.
It wouldn't be HubSpot if it wasn't a template.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, but super exciting stuff. Like, I can't wait to see what this means, especially for the app developer community, right? I'm really hoping that this starts to open up a lot more app developers to utilize custom objects, like, once the app object is a thing, if it ever is a thing, right? Because that's a great place for it to live, right? And if it lets more people use HubSpot in ways that have apps that require the use of custom object to represent the data in the right way, that's going to be amazing. But only time will tell, so we'll see what happens there. I got my fingers crossed.
I think that's the huge deal that most people won't realize, because they're usually not tooling around in free portals.
Yep.
But the fact that you get these 4 objects in free at free level, like, just yesterday I saw a comment, a 4-month-old Connor's post where Dharmesh talked about the object, everything is an object future. Somebody replied on that, saying that HubSpot was never going to be able to compete with like full scale CRMs until custom objects was available at every level.
Yeah.
Right. And there is some validity to that, but I love this continued HubSpot approach, line in the sand. Like, sorry, folks, we don't trust you on this one. Mm-hmm. You've proven that you can't handle customizability every which way in the portal. So we're going to give you more stuff, but there's guardrails always. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And now, like, because it allows for standardization, like you say, now it's from a support perspective, from an app partner development perspective, like, oh, you're using courses? I know what that looks like, because this is how it works in HubSpot. It's not some custom object called courses, where you just named everything however you felt like.
Yeah. I've a little bit of a different take on it, and where that I don't think it's necessarily that they don't trust users with customization. I think it's more so, I mean, I'm sure that plays a factor into it. Like, you got to keep the product supportable at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
But I think also, as you can see with, like, a lot of betas that tend to run really, really long, right? And you see it happen a lot where HubSpot will take new features and they'll stick them into enterprise portals to limit the amount of people using them, right? Or they'll heavily rely on like, private betas and stuff like that. I do think there is also a bit of the method to the madness around saying like, hey, put the feature out in a limited capacity so we can understand how people are using it. And we really, really kind of understand the logical next step of what we need to add, what we need to change, this, that, and the other thing before we just set it out into the masses and then can't make sense of anything. Kind of like when you A/B test a thing in HubSpot, right? What do they tell you to do? They tell you to make small changes, right? If you just let everybody use it and go completely nuts with it, it's going to get really, really, really hard to discern what you need to do about the core features of whatever that piece is, right? And make the right changes to it to make sure the core functionality rocks, right? Now, think they've over-indexed on that a bit by making custom objects only available at the enterprise level for so long? Yeah, probably, right? Like when I really think of the difference between starter, pro, and enterprise, my mindset has very much been like starter gives you a taste of the hub. Pro is where the majority of the feature sets come in. And most of the stuff you see in enterprise is really stuff that only makes sense to scaling businesses on HubSpot, right? Like it made sense for a long time that playbooks only sat at the enterprise level. Because think about it, playbooks are really a tool that you use to kind of scale your efforts when you got a lot of new people coming in and they need to know how to do their job. You're probably not going to build a bunch of playbooks for a 2-person company, right? But as soon as you start onboarding a whole bunch of people and growing and have more processes in place, right? Playbooks all of a sudden make sense. So it kind of made sense that they were there, right? And like a lot of the other stuff that you see around, user management and things like that really kind of come in at the enterprise level, to me, it kind of makes sense. But like, dude, give people 2 custom objects at pro, right? Like make it unlimited or whatever, or a higher amount when you go to enterprise and just kind of scale it up. But like, like I am in the boat of like, it's time for pro customers to be able to create at least a couple, custom objects that they need. Right. But
yeah, I think it's super interesting to watch. Just like knowing kind of like, and obviously when you get to know PMs and you understand their concerns, and it's often not what you're expecting because there's some internal HubSpot thing like in the way of being able to do it. I think it's like, how do you, like even at enterprise, we complain about 10 sometimes. So like the taste at 2, right, for pro, and then like you like you say, you expose it to more people and the pipelines don't work. Like I can't tag them and I'm used to seeing this over here. So it's definitely always a balancing act. But the cool thing is the way they can play with it sometimes at free and enterprise. Because I remember the first time I saw this guided experience when I opened up a free portal, and it was like, do you want to use this for marketing events or sales? And it came with like 3 properties, like based on my choice. That like now thinking back now to what we just saw today, it's like that was like 0.0001, and then this is 1.0, and we just didn't see everything in between. So I try to give them credit and be empathetic, whenever possible, because they got 200,000 customers to listen to, and all these different teams.
If there's ever something that's just like, if you're ever saying it's like, man, why hasn't HubSpot done this yet? As frustrating as it is to hear, there's probably always a good internal reason that you are not aware of, right? My favorite example is the whole conversation, that there was around, oh, why can't I use a workflow to enroll someone in a sequence? Right? And if you think about that logically, 3 steps ahead is because HubSpot didn't want people to tank their,
that's literally
deliverability
because we don't trust you.
Well, hold on. It's not we don't trust you. It's we are trying to protect you.
Yeah.
Right.
And us.
And us. Well, actually, not really so much on us, because that wouldn't hit HubSpot's email deliverability. That's just tanking your like business's Gmail, right? If you could, in theory, enroll your whole contact database in a sequence and burn through that email addresses 3,000 emails per day, all of a sudden that rep can't use their email. All of a sudden your domains are getting blacklisted, right? Because the sales rep decided to do some stupid shit. Like HubSpot, and it took forever. The reason it took them forever to deploy that is because they had to figure out the best way to get around that while keeping people happy, right?
Yeah.
But there are like reasons. Now, there are some things where I'm just like, I have no idea. Like why, for example, in the legacy forms tool, it's still a sales and service hub enterprise feature to do conditional redirects and not something available in marketing. No idea, right? In the new forms tool, it is. Okay, bring it down to the other one. Like, you know what I mean? So like, but
That
I'm
was
sure
one of
there's
the
some sort of technical stuff getting in the way of them doing it, right?
that
I'm
hug
assuming.
that hug about the forms
Mhm.
was maybe the most enlightening hug that I've seen.
Crazy.
Listening to like when they say out loud, like because I didn't know, it's like there's no place in the infrastructure to save a draft form. So literally, that's why all of this stuff can't happen because we literally cannot do it.
Yep.
And that's where it's like, okay, so it makes sense. The choice between rebuilding. That's what I love. Like when it's clear, like they're choosing not to fix the little things because they have a bigger vision. And when it's delivered, everybody loves it.
Yeah.
I think that's a thing where it helps them, for lack of a better phrase, get away with it, because all of these things like conditional properties and the things that people have been wishing for forever, usually those things, when they deliver it, it's like the best possible version and it crushes how it works in any other system you've ever seen.
Yeah. And I look at HubSpot a lot in the same way, like, you know, how I experienced a lot of this stuff at Apple, where it's like when Apple would take their time to come out with a feature for the iPhone that other phones have had forever, right? What would you hear? You'd hear all the Android users coming out and say, Samsung's had this for all time. Oh, you just got it on an iPhone. Look at you. So excited about blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, HubSpot does the same thing where it's like, sure, another platform has done this, right? But like HubSpot grew up in a very different fundamental way. Let's remember, it didn't start as a CRM, it started as a marketing product and evolved into one over time, right? And so it's going to take longer sometimes for them to get these features, but at the same time, when they do it, they try to do it right. Have there been times where they've misstepped? Yes. Right? like bots came out accidentally when the conversations tool launched. Like that was the whole thing. Let's not forget that, right? But they've matured and they don't do that stuff as often anymore. But typically, again, you see them really take their time with these features. So when they come out, they're as rock solid as they can be in most cases. I know you can't perfectly apply that logic across everything. I know everyone's yapping about the lead object now because people still don't understand it, right? And they're so Salesforce brained that they don't understand kind of how it's used, right? But, you know, that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about quotes, dude.
Let's do it. No, this is the segue. Like all the stuff we're talking about, like we're moving to this platform world where even with quotes, we want to make these, you know, nice proposals. We want to use all this other platform tooling and all the information that it's gathering to say, hey, I can make a personalized experience at every step now.
Yep.
The close, like when we get to quotes, especially something like quotes, where it's like, this is how you get the money. When we can't use that stuff, or it's hard to use, or we got to involve developers, right? As we get more native stuff like this, it's going to be easier to say, okay, maybe eventually, and that's not what we're talking about today, but like the product library is not the only way to get product information onto a quote. If we've got the services object or appointments objects or even listings, right? Like all these other ways. And now that it's native, like we can start to build towards this world where it's not like so tunnel vision around quotes and line items in this case. So
it's an exciting future, man. But also there's a very bright future now for HubSpot quoting, which is really cool. Here, let me share my screen and I can kind of get into what we kind of did here, right? So let me pop over to this. Can you see it? Is it up there? I
can. It is up here.
I'm just checking the LinkedIn just to make sure it's doing its whole thing.
It's going to take a minute.
Yeah, it'll probably take a second. Anyway.
Manage your rules.
Yeah. This is exciting stuff. So let's talk about what quote happily actually is, and I'll try to do my best here to kind of adjust my screen so it's viewable for people, right? So quote happily, all right. The big thing that we set out to do with quote happily is essentially make HubSpot quoting a more competitive CPQ solution, right? That's the very base, kind of situation, right? We talk to tons, like I don't even know how to put a final number on it. We talk to tons of customers, HubSpot partners such as yourself. We talk to you a lot about this, as well as HubSpotters themselves. So like service folks, sellers, support folks, implementers, solutions engineers, right? And, we knew obviously there was a lot to be desired from HubSpot's quoting functionality, right? But the fact of the matter is like there's plenty of customers out there that really want to use HubSpot quoting, but they don't because it's typically just missing a couple of key things, right? So again, the analogy that I use for everybody is like, imagine my arm, right, represents all the different features of HubSpot quoting, right? Eventually what happens is you get down to this like cliff here, right? And there's all these people that say, man, I really, really want to use HubSpot quoting, but only if it had price books. Only if it had rules, only if it had a better way to do approvals, right? And what happens is there's all these people that want to use HubSpot quoting, but end up having to jump off this cliff onto another solution because they need just those like one or two like really key sort of like features in order to be able to like run their sales process on HubSpot and have a little bit more control over it, right? Because, frankly, while the HubSpot quoting tool I think is beautiful, it's a bit of a Wild West situation, or it's a prison, right? In that I can either quote whatever the heck I want and have a speedy sales process and open us up for all kinds of like risk and things that we can't promise to customers and all that kind of stuff, or we turn on approvals for literally every quote and have to approve everything and slow things down and make the process a lot stickier, right? So, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take this like HubSpot quoting feature cliff and just stretch it as far as possible, right? Because the amount of people that are in this gap of like, damn, wish I could use HubSpot quotes. I can't. So I have to go look at some other solution that costs the same amount as my Sales Hub seat, right? Effectively doubling the price of my Sales Hub seat users, right? Because I've got to go quote in a different platform, right? And not even use HubSpot and slow things down because of that, right? And when all I need is these couple of things, and oh, by the way, those platforms are so expensive because they do so many other things beyond those core couple things I need, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to solve for that customer, right? That's the big thing, because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. HubSpot loses a lot of deals because of this, right? And we don't want to be, oh, you don't have CPQ features to be the reason someone has to either slow down the sales process and make things more complicated and disjoint the rep experience by using a different platform, or saying, I'm going to go with the Salesforce, or I'm going to go with some other, platform that has some more native CPQ features already built into it, right? We're trying to make HubSpot quoting way more competitive and really give Sales Hub that edge it needs to really compete with a lot of these other solutions.
Yeah. I think a lot of us are going to be over here like educating on this topic. Like CPQ is a super trap because like it also
means a lot of things to different people.
Exactly. And like, as you said that, I remember a couple years ago, because a couple times like in the organizations I was in, like the felt need for configuration to be able to start from scratch and say, I've got 400 different options. I want to be able to start from anywhere and get to anywhere else. It's like, well, we only sell 10 versions, so maybe we don't need to do that. Yeah. But anyways, like trying to, like at that time, Deal Hub CPQ was a big one, right? And I could get like agreement on if it was a good idea, but whether or not we could execute on it, like people didn't believe that it was still a jump from all of like custom code everything as a way to do this. And I remember a couple of years ago, like looking up ratings, like trying to sell it internally. And I remember being on G2 and seeing HubSpot CPQ. And I laughed out loud. Yeah. And I was like, okay, this is kind of a brilliant move, because but this is where it's like, you're not a fit for all the people that are going to come in with expectations. And the way I've started breaking it down is like, it's been HubSpot quotes, right?
Yes.
So the Q of
Mhm.
CPQ,
Mhm.
there's been nothing to help you price
Yep.
anything. Like you
Yep.
cannot get any direction on price based on any information in the system. It's all like, tribal knowledge that you have to
Mhm.
rely on 100%. Then even getting to there, which is the space I like most, because for most organizations, that's the part that they need. Like
Mhm.
they think they need way more configuration, but when they break down their strategy, if you can get them there, like we don't need to start. We sell the same 10 packages every time.
Mhm.
Just build
They
those
need guidance
packages.
to configure the right solution for
Right.
someone. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Yep.
instead of just like haphazardly, organically building the same package
Mhm.
over and over,
Yeah.
it's like now we have tools, and I love to see it because there's all this. When you can't use the system like that, you have different business units competing against each other so easily, or you're having to create 10 different versions of the same product in the product library.
Mhm.
And it just didn't work. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's why people fell off the cliff.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so what we've launched, right? And this is just like the beginning. Like the directions we can go with this product are quite literally like infinite, right? And like I can even see a world one day where we do sort of like a lightweight product configurator that like generates a custom line item with whatever it was that someone like put together, right? Like that's definitely something that's in the cards, and I think it's probably an idea on our ideas forum at some point. If it's not, go at it. But what we kind of set out to solve for in this like version 1, right, is one, how do we take like the Wild West world of HubSpot quoting and apply a layer of just the right amount of guidance, guardrails, and governance, right? And really what that's like kind of solving for is like saying like, hey, when I'm selling something, I need like nudges on like maybe when I should be discounting or how much I should be discounting or what I'm allowed to discount, right? If my sales reps are getting a little bit too generous, I need a way to kind of like pull that back and provide some guardrails around what they're allowed to do. On top of that, like, if I do find myself in a situation where I need an approval, I don't want to approve everything. Like I want to be able to do just the approvals on what needs to be done and then have those proper guardrails in place to ensure that like, someone can't do something that's like not even worth the time of looking at an approval because it's going to be auto rejected, right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece. Also, like, the idea of quote approvals in HubSpot today is just, it's extremely elementary, right? It's like it's either all on or all off, and you choose an email it goes to, and that's it, right? Like the truth of the matter is like more complex selling teams need a lot more functionality like around approvals, right? In terms of when they're triggered, how the approval process actually works, right? Things like that. And then on top of that, we started to introduce price books, right? So price books are a big thing that every single time when I was an SE and I had a deal that was Sales Hub and I saw the word price book, I threw up in my mouth a little bit because I'm like, nope, we do not do it. And a lot of the apps in the app marketplace don't do it that well either, right? So that's another big thing that people are constantly asking for. Like when we talk to a lot of the HubSpot sellers, and we say like, what's the biggest thing losing you deals on Sales Hub? It's price books, and also price books, right? And so we knew that was like a really big thing that we needed to kind of build into as well. And then you get into some of like the more nuanced issues, right? Like you mentioned business units, right? Like we're in a world where multiple sales teams selling different sets of products are living on HubSpot, but the big problem is there's only one product library, right? Sure, there's folders, but there's still only one product library, right? And so making sure people have access to what they can sell in different situations dynamically, right, was also like a really big part of that. And we're going to be using that price book functionality to actually add in the price part of that price book tool, doing this thing called price rules, which is going to be a dynamic way to set pricing on your products without having to create 10 different versions of the same product with a different price, right? So that's coming shortly after launch, right? So we're working on that stuff now, but Pricebooks has its like launch capability right now, which really acts a lot like a product catalog. So like you can like very much through a combination of like rules blocks and putting different products with different prices in price books, you can do price books today, right? But we're going to be doing it in an even better way, which is really cool. So yeah, let's talk about it, right? So I actually set up some of this stuff earlier for a video that I did today, where, if we talk about rules, right? So think about rules as, again, I go back to the 3 G's that I've been talking about, right? Like, how do you apply a layer of guidance, guardrails, governance? Like, what are you allowed to do when it comes to quoting, right? And so rules are kind of at the heart of all those decisions that you're making there, right? So basically, when you go and create a rule, the way that this works is first you go ahead and give it a name, right? You give it a description. Okay, so I'll just say, test rule, right? And then I'll just give it a description. Awesome. What you do next is you come down and you set conditions. Okay. So what a condition is, all right, is we let you look at any of the objects in HubSpot that are associated to the deal that you're creating this quote for. There are also some other stuff that's like just related to the quote. So for example, like information about the quote itself, right? Line items on the quote or on the deal, right? Discounts, fees, taxes, like all that stuff that's like on the quote itself that you wouldn't necessarily consider a HubSpot object or a custom object, right? You can even do stuff based on teams. So if only certain rules like apply to users on certain teams or just specific users, right? Like, don't let Kyle Jepsen give anyone a discount on anything, right? Like, there's so many different things that you can do. Basically, what happens is you choose the associated object that you want to create a rule for. So, like, let's say company, right? And what we can do here is then it brings up all the different properties or attributes of that object or that variable that you selected to be able to then kind of like isolate, okay, what about this company do you want to trigger this condition, right? So maybe I'll do something like country, right? And then we can select operators, right? So like this is a lot like just building lists. It's a lot like building workflows. Like people build filters based on objects all the time in HubSpot. And oh, by the way, we designed this entire thing to feel like HubSpot. Like we want you to walk into this interface and be like, okay, like I get it already. Like this very much feels like the tool I'm already using that this thing is purpose built for. We don't build this for any other CRM. This is simply just to enhance HubSpot, right? So what we could do is something like this. We could say, hey, if the company is none of, and then we could just write, United. I have it as a free text field, but like this could be a drop down. It could be whatever, right? We could say, hey, if the company is not in the United States, right? And I could add additional conditions. I can make it and or like all the same stuff you're used to with filtering in HubSpot, right? I could group things, right? There's a bunch of different stuff we can do here. But what we do with rules is we set these things called outcomes, right? And depending on if a deal or the quote I'm creating for that deal meets any of these conditions that you're set here or that are set here, you can trigger an outcome. Those outcomes are either locking in a price book, right? So like, let's say, for example, you have quite literally a price book property, right? That you set, and you want to say, if the company's price book is equal to silver tier pricing, right? Make sure the silver tier pricing book is being used right away when you go to create the quote, right? So you don't have to look around for it. You don't have to sift through stuff, anything like that. You can set countersigners, which I'll be honest with you, I don't know what this means. This is new because we're always innovating and it's great, but it has something to do with like who's actually signing the quote internally, I believe, right? So the countersigner, and you'll see users in your portal here, and these are folks who have to sign off on a quote internally, right?
No, and this is like, that's a perfect example of like a use case that we wouldn't have touched before, and now we're a full platform, and now like our exports manager who has to understand which country are we selling to again. All right, you got to take that shit out of there, or we need to add this stuff in, right?
Yes, right. Or you can even accomplish that through an approval too, right?
Right.
But the big ones here that you're probably going to use like 90% of the time, especially if you're making a lot of rules, are going to be notifications, blocks, or requiring an approval, right? So like really quick, just to touch on this one, what we could do is we could say, hey, require an approval if the country we're selling to is outside of the United States, right? And we can say, this quote requires international shipping approval, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just an example, right? But again, what a require approval is going to do is it's going to make it so instead of being able to just publish the quote and create it on the spot, it goes into an approval state. And then those approval logics or the approval logic is managed by the workflows tool using quote-based workflow actions we've created that will actually send the quote to get approved by whoever you want. Right. And on top of that, you can use quote-based workflows now for what you think you should be able to do with quote-based workflows, which is create either very simple or unbelievably unnecessarily complex approval processes. Right. Because you could literally say, hey, if the quote is over $10,000, send it to finance. And once finance approves it, go take a look and see if there's any exotic snakes that you're selling. And if there are exotic snakes on the quote, send it over to Greg, and Greg will approve that because Greg approves the sale of all the exotic snakes or whatever it may be, right? And you can, again, just use branching logic, workflow actions, go-to actions, all this kind of stuff, right? To create approval processes, right? Which is super, super cool. So you can get very complex or as complex as you need to be when it comes to it. And this is generally something that you could only do with like a PandaDoc or a Deal Hub or like some off-platform quoting system that's going to have advanced approvals like baked into it, right? But now we're harnessing the power of HubSpot to be able to do that just through a couple of simple workflow actions. So that's approvals. The other one is notify. This is kind of like in the realm of guidance, I would say, right? So what you can do in this situation is if the quote meets the condition, you can just simply pop up a message on the quote builder to say, hey, just so you know, blah, 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 right? So like, it could be, for example, saying like, if the company has spent over 10K with us, suggest the sales rep gives them a 5% discount on either everything or specific line items or whatever it may be, right? Another really cool use case of this is, how a lot of like ERP integrations will send over like inventory data onto like product objects, right?
Yeah.
Since all that stuff writes to the line item for whatever the current state of it is, right? You could literally build notifications that say if quantity level of line item is below a certain threshold, right? Pop up a notification to either block them from making the quote or saying, hey, maybe call the warehouse before you quote this or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So
no, it's a perfect use. It's a perfect example of like guardrails, not gates.
Yeah.
Right. Because sometimes we just like the sales guy knows that oftentimes like inventory numbers might not be up to date, or they better like they got to call somebody. Yep. But they get in these modes where it's like we trust them at the same time. So it's like we're just going to notify to make sure like he might have already handled that. So there's no reason to stop it, but we're just going to give it a chance.
You move forward, just not veer off the road, right? Like that's the whole idea. So so there's that. And then of course there's blocks, right? And a good example of this, it's like, hey, sales rep, obviously you can't quote 50% of a discount on this item or this whatever, right? Or if it's like, is the margin too weird or like, something like that. So there's all these different things you can do and it'll block the quote from getting created at all. Right. So these are rules. Okay. And I'll show you what this looks like in HubSpot right now. So if I'm in HubSpot, I'm going to go create a deal here. Okay. Or I have this deal that I'm using already. I'll just go edit this existing one. Right. So this is a new part. Right. What we've done in order to be able to use all these tools and enforce this stuff, like the price books, like the rules, right? We've actually completely rebuilt the entire HubSpot quote editor. And just to double down on anyone watching this that isn't 100% clear yet, we are creating HubSpot quotes in HubSpot. We are not creating quotes in a separate tool. Okay. These are HubSpot quotes. You're left with a HubSpot quote at the end of the day. They do all the stuff that HubSpot quotes does, except the experience of building them has been completely supercharged with everything that's been missing, right? We still have more stuff we can do, but a lot of the big stuff, right? So here, the other thing we've done is instead of going through that like normal sort of like carousel format where you're going left and right and changing like one or two things, right? We've taken the entire quote building experience and everything that you would edit on that and put it into a single pane of glass, right? So you literally are just editing everything from one single page instead of going left and going back and going forward and like changing this and changing that, right? No one wants to do that, right? So we have this all done in here. Now, on top of that, Again, this is what allows us to do things like this without having to use something like a Chrome extension, right? Now, I'm not a Chrome extension hater by any means. However, sometimes IT people can be Chrome extension haters, right? And some people might not be using Chrome, right? So we knew we had to build this in a way where it's our own interface, but this all feels unapologetically HubSpot.
Yes.
Right. We very much build this interface for you to think, oh, this is just a natural extension of HubSpot, because it is. Right. So everything is going to feel like HubSpot. It's going to look like HubSpot. It's going to be very familiar. However, everything is right at your fingertips. Right. And it has all this added layers of functionality, including the rules. So let me just show you real quick. So right now I'm in my approval required rule here, right? Because I'm discounting between 5 and 10%. But if I were to say drop this discount down to 3%, again, since this is our interface, we have the ability to do things like, hey, this switched over to a notice now, right? And it's just congratulating them for being a generous little sales rep, right? But if we were to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to quote them a 15% because my, quote is feeling kind of scary here, right?
Calm down, bro.
Right? Exactly. You can see we got a little bug here because this should be stopping me from hitting this button. Oh, there you go.
There you go.
It's working, right? So it's not actually letting me create the workflow or create the rule. Create the quote because I have this error here, right? So if I were to come down here and bring it back to like my, conservative sort of 5% discount here, I could do it and it'll automatically update here, right? So there's
and we're setting
telling me what I can do, right? And it's stopping me from what I can't do, right?
Yeah.
Which is ideal.
And we have control over all these messages.
Yep.
So like, maybe that error says like, calm down. Let's try maybe 5 to 10% if you want to approve, or
exactly
less than that if you want to be able to run this on your own.
And since it's filter based, right? That means you can be as specific or as broad as you want, right? So it could be if the line item, you can just say if the line item just discounted all is a certain percentage, right? Do this. Or if you say if the line item's name is exotic cobra and you're selling it into Tennessee, right? Only allow a 7.5% discount. Like you could go crazy with like the combinations, right? So it lets you have that granular level of control over how people can quote, right? Or be broader in situations where you need to be, right?
Yeah.
Now, the other thing you're going to see on here too is price books, right? So whenever you're building a quote, it's got a price book. If you don't have price books, it's just using your HubSpot product library. So like, you don't need to set up price books. Hold on, someone's at my door. Give me 1 second.
Yep. No, this is beautiful.
It's just UPS. Like, why do you ring my doorbell? Like, it's so strange.
Just let you know, dude.
Yeah. Okay. So, what is going on? I got like some weird. Oh, TikTok started going off my phone for some reason. All right. So, price books, right? What price books do right now at launch is they sort of act as like a product catalog. Okay. But we're going to be building in dynamic pricing to them as well. All right. So the idea is when you go and build a price book, I'm going to pop into here, right? You go and create the price book, you give it a name, give it a description, call it Chris's price book test for Chris, right? And essentially what you do is you're going to come in here and you can add products to your price book, right? I've got everything zoomed in, so it's going to look a little bit funny here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put in a small object, a medium object, and a large object, and your soul into this price book, right? I'm going to go ahead and hit add.
A question.
Right? Yes,
question. We're on the quote hapily site here in the app.
In the admin panel, correct.
That sidebar that just popped out looks exactly like the HubSpot sidebar.
That's the whole point. And these are your HubSpot products, right? We want you to feel like you're in HubSpot when you're using an app built for HubSpot, right? We don't want sure, with admin panel stuff like this, yes, we've got to take you out of the HubSpot interface, but that doesn't mean it can't be familiar. right?
Yeah.
Our whole ethos is that if we're going to take you out of HubSpot, we're going to provide you an experience that you feel like you already know how to use right off the bat, right? Because again, our whole thing is keeping people inside of HubSpot. And in situations where we can't, we want you to really feel like you are, right? And so again, since this is all HubSpot stuff, we make it look like HubSpot as much as possible. And it's very intentional.
Yeah. And admins of the world, like, lean into this part, because the reason that other products fail, as much as you want to be in control of this, your sales manager, whoever they are, is going to want to be able to do some stuff on this side of the fence. And the less it looks like everything else they're supposed to be doing, the less usable, the less adoption, all that stuff. And that kills these kinds of investments, no matter how bad you need it. So instead of focusing on, like time savings or reducing mistakes and stuff like that, like focusing on the value of stuff like this, it like helps so much in terms of getting the buy-in you need, because there is cost here. But once you realize, like, once you get the investment, you get to all of the things that you would love to be the reason that we're going to invest in it, but we just never win with those like total cost of ownership reasons, like saving so much time here and here and here, and no more mistakes here and here and here. Like, they can live with that stuff. Sometimes it's crazy, but this stuff where it's like, and you show the sales manager, and it's like, oh man, this is actually going to be really easy. I've seen some other systems and I hate them. So the idea of CPQ scares me. I don't have to be scared anymore.
You don't have to be scared, because it looks like the tool you're already using.
Yes.
Right? And we don't do that to be lazy and just copy HubSpot style.
No.
We do it so when you go in there, you don't feel like you're learning something new. It's a very tactical decision we made. Right. We could have made this look like anything. Right. But we said, let's unapologetically make it look just like HubSpot, so people spend less time learning a new interface. Right.
Yeah.
Since they're
we've been talking about that a
lot
lot lately. As more people develop for the platform, you can tell which ones are focused on HubSpot and which are not. And when you find the ones that are focused on HubSpot, it's being developed in a way where all the other stuff is going to work the way it's supposed to. Right.
Exactly. Yep. So in this case, I've added some of these products here. Right now, keep in mind, pricing rules are coming. Okay. So right now, like, you're just having these, it's kind of acting like a product catalog, if you will. What pricing rules is going to let you do is kind of the same thing I just showed you with quote rules, right? Except it's going to dynamically change the pricing when this book is active and being used, right? So instead of, the old way, which is create a bunch of products, create duplicates of those products, and just change the prices and stuff them into folders, not a price book, right? You're literally going to be able to use your real HubSpot products, right? But depending on the book that they live in, the prices will dynamically change, right? So whether or not that's like, if product SKU equals, specific number, set the price to something different. Or if product name is known, apply a 5% discount. Or if product category property is 1, 2, 3, and this option in ABC, right, then apply a 2.6% discount. You'll be able to set those rules dynamically across the product library and whatever products are inside that price book, right? But on top of that, this also really solves for the whole idea of like, hey, we've got 5 business units and 6 different sales teams, and they don't all sell the stuff that's in there, right? We want to basically enforce that they are given the option to quote the stuff that they're actually allowed to sell and not have to sift through everyone else's shit. Right.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea. Right. So pricing rules inside of price books are going to be ridiculous. And once we have this done, which is going to be in the next couple of weeks, right, this is going to be like full everything you need for price books. HubSpot,
let me run this one by you and make sure I'm understanding, because I'm super excited for this part. And like, I'm in a portal right now, like starting to get familiar with quote happily. And an example is like the international thing where it's like, we don't want to have to, for shipping, run everything through a DHL to get the quote. And then and at that point we can do the quote. Instead, we want to, create static fees.
Yep.
But $250 for international doesn't make sense for domestic, right? So if we're in like the international price book, or we're using some factors to say like, I don't need 8 different shipping product library listings now. I can just use, I don't know if it's either like set the price and then discount it based on where it is, or like how the rules are going to work. But basically letting the dynamic nature of, hey, this is international, it's going to be this price. It's not, so it's going to be this price. I don't need 2 different versions of the shipping line item.
Yeah, because remember, you can set a price book from a rule. Right. So like there's a lot of different ways you could go about that. Right.
Yeah.
Or you could simply just like build a rule that says this is what you should charge for shipping. Go at it as a one-time fee or something like that. Right. Like there's always some way around it in a combination of like one of these 3 things. Right?
No, it's all like filters and objects and properties.
Yeah.
Like that's
wild.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the price book. Now, again, when you're on the deal here, all right, let me refresh. I wonder if I'm going to hit it. No, it didn't happen. Cool. So let me go at, oh, by the way, if you hit details here, right, really quick, what you're going to see, I didn't publish. Oh yeah, there it is. So you'll see your quote.
What?
If the quote goes through any approvals, you'll see a chronological order of all the approvals that happened right here too. By the way, guys, All right. Now, when I come back and edit this, what's really cool is when I go change the price book here, it's not locked because I didn't set it with a rule, right? But you can like lock it in with a rule. I'm going to switch it to Chris's price book, and it's going to say, hey, just so you know, in Chris's price book, this thingamajig line item doesn't exist in there, right? So it's going to take it away from the quote, right? And so when I come in here and select from my product library now, it's only showing me stuff that's in the active price book, right?
Yes.
It's so much better.
Beautiful.
I think we need to add like folder structure and stuff to this too as well. And I don't think we have that yet. Right. But again, we're on day 3.
Right.
We're on day 3.
Well, that's also where like HubSpot themselves are on like month 2 of that. Right.
Yeah. Right. So we'll get there.
But that's the reason like the price books are still powerful, because even in that situation, and this is what I've been experiencing, like when you're like you want some kind of continuity throughout the business units. So you have keywords, and as you try to search and you still have a bunch of products you don't care about, and you got to go from page to page to find the one, if you don't remember exactly what it's called, right? That's what we're helping with here. And if we could, because a surprising number of people still don't, they haven't even touched HubSpot quotes. So I'd love, before we end, just to show them and also remind others like how, like all this ability to edit on one screen.
Yeah, dude, look at it.
Like right that's here. Where like when I first saw this, like, and I met with Ryan, I'm like, so all the things I'm seeing here, like, are connected to all the things I'm used to seeing. And he's like, yeah.
Quotes API, baby.
Right.
Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah, I mean, all we're doing is we're just the HubSpot quote builder, it's using the quotes API to generate a quote. We're doing the same thing, except we're giving you a different builder, right? That's the whole idea. And like, that's what allows us to like enforce all this stuff and have so much control over the UI without the use of like a Chrome extension, right?
Right.
Because the original like proof of concept build of this was a Chrome extension, right? But like the thing that's tough about Chrome extensions, if like HubSpot's UI changes, well, congrats, your whole Chrome extension breaks, right? And it's just like sick. Like, we don't want to.
I think I remember notifying you guys of that.
Yeah,
when the product library stuff came out.
Yeah. So we're going to be working to like make sure like we're supporting everything HubSpot quoting supports, and like there's still like, plenty of room for us to kind of improve on this like original one. The only one other thing I want to show you though is workflows for quotes, right? So now what you'll notice is if you go create a workflow from scratch, that's a tongue twister if I've ever heard one. You know how you can build quote-based workflows?
It's under deals.
Am I crazy? Oh my God, I am. Yeah. I'm just blind, right? So when you build quote-based workflows, what you'll notice now is there is a new set of workflow actions for quote workflows. And this is as simple as putting in the name of the person the email address of the person you want to approve the quote, right? What's going to happen here is when the quote goes through the workflow, and this is done by either you set your own sort of enrollment criteria saying like, oh, as soon as it's in a, a needs approval state, put them through the workflow. You can do that. Something that I kind of glazed over a little bit is with approval rules, right? We have this thing called approval queues, and approval queues are essentially it's a property that we inject into quotes. And you can add additional approval queues just by adding properties inside of HubSpot, and they'll show up in here. An approval queue is sort of meant to be a easy, like an easy trigger that you can set, right? So like if you've got a bunch of different rules that put things into like a couple of standard approval processes, instead of like rebuilding your quote, enrollment criteria on the workflow 100 different times, you can simply just select which approval queue is this, and it just goes into it, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a quality of life thing, right? It's like the big thing, right?
In theory, like since it's property based, we might be able to set up a view too, like on the quote screen, and say like, hey, sales manager, you should be looking at this like at this time every day. There's any approvals, that's where they're going to be. Yeah. And that's where it's like, sure. Like
reports, are quotes and reports yet? I can't remember.
I don't know.
Maybe not.
I think there's lots of things like, it's like the way to make life easier doesn't always have to be creating new. It's just kind of curating. So even though there's a lot of new stuff here, like I could go create that property, and we could manually say like check off sales approval, and now it has the views. But like doing it inside of this process is what has been missing, because like if it's not a holistic experience, it's like now I'm not even taking advantage of quotes in workflows. Like I don't care that there's quote-based workflows now because I don't use quotes and don't talk to me about it. Doesn't have this one thing. Now this kind of granularity you can get to, it was like we had the very top level ability to just do a quote, and we could have done some super complex stuff with quotes, but the stuff in the middle about how do we do the prices in the quotes was gone. Because and this is where it's like, it's properties, it's objects, it's workflows. If you want to account for the situations where all these 20 different variables come into play, and that's when the approval is needed, you can do that. And we're not going to make the 19 other times you go through an approval just because you're afraid of that 20th time. Right?
Exactly. And let me show you kind of like a finished version of this, right? So what we can do here is we can set up our filter criteria to say quote, is it quote status? I can't remember. Quote approval status is any of pending approval, right? And then if we wanted to like go a little bit deeper and leverage one of the queues, approval queue, right? I got to go pick up my kid in the bus in 10 minutes. Is any of sales approval, right? And again, I can go add more of these in the settings, right? So what's going to happen here is when the quote goes into this approval status, right? It'll start the workflow action, right? And then right here, I'm branching based on the quote amount, right? So like I can do something to say, all right, if it's over $10,000, send it off to finance for approval, and then go to like the other person that needs to approve it. But if it's not over 10,000, it just goes straight to that person, right? And then what we do is we have this final one called publish the quote, right? Now, seasoned quote workflow builders might say, oh, well, hey, Max, that's kind of stupid because couldn't you just go into CRM and hit set property value?
Stop it.
And then do approval status and then change it to approved? Oh, that workflow action's stupid. Well, here's where it gets really wild. What this action does, right? Because remember, it's very possible for a quote to be going through multiple approvals, right? What this does is it says, okay, when the quote gets to this step where I'm supposed to publish it, it's going to go look up the quote, and we have a system in the background that's tracking if that quote is still out for pending approvals, right? Because it it knows which workflows it's going through and like all this other stuff, right? So what'll happen is if there's any outstanding approvals that have not been approved yet on that quote, when it gets here, it's going to do nothing unless it is the last approval to get approved, right? So for example, we have a customer who, for whatever reason, could have potentially up to 18 people that need to approve a quote, right? Now, you're not going to put all of that in a single workflow because the quote won't get approved for 6 months, right? So what you do is you can build separate workflow actions or separate workflows that send the approval out to the people all at the same time, right? And then they just kind of approve it. And when they approve it, when the last person approves it and it hits this, it goes and checks to see if there's anything else open. And then it says, oh, there's no more other pending ones. I'll go ahead and publish the quote. Just like that, right? And it's really cool
people.
When you get, some
Can we just
potentially up to, don't even get me started on it.
We just do business better, please.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Exactly. Right. That was like our first feedback. We were like, maybe not require 18 people to publish the quote, right? So that's the whole thing. But yeah, and so that's kind of like the big stuff right now. The stuff that's on the horizon, again, you're going to see price rules hit price books in no time, right? Or I say no time. I'm going to get in trouble for that in the next couple of weeks or so, right? Obviously, we got to get through inbound and everything there. But you still can accomplish what a price book does anyway without it. But like, we want to make it easier. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're still kind of doing the old way that like is not really a price book, but at least you're making it so none of those other things are being seen, right? And a lot of people are doing that right now, right? And, it's a good transition to say, hey, just set up different catalogs, right? And do that. And then eventually transition off your multi-product strategy and use price rules when price rules is here, right?
Yeah.
So look for that in like October or something like that. Again, I'm going to get in trouble for making any of these promises, but yeah. So there's that. And then the other big thing we're going to be building into pretty soon is product bundling, right? So the idea is not the idea. What the feature is there is that like if you go and add like a product, you should be able to add like one thing and then have it also tack on all the stuff that should come with it, right? So like you can build these pre-made bundles of products and then you just go click it to add it once, drops in everything that's necessary. So it's like, I'm selling this software platform. I need to also include things like the training, the training, the support, the this, the that, right? Depending on the situation, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's just like, dude, there's so many directions we can go with this, to really, really make HubSpot quoting a lot more competitive. But dude, this being like we've already had 100,
this is exciting.
More than 100 installs in 2 days, right? So like people need this stuff, which is great. And so like, we're happy we can be the ones to like bring better quoting natively into HubSpot, right? So it's exciting times, man.
No, this is really well done. Yeah. And it helps like when the UX is already why wouldn't you just try to do it the same way HubSpot does it? Like correct. Now it's very easy for me to say smooth execution, guys, because they've already figured out a lot of this UX for you.
Exactly.
But this is where some outside perspective, really goes a long way to curate a better experience.
Sure.
So this is awesome. Like, congratulations.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, I hate to have to rush out of here, but my kid's bus is going to be here any minute and I got to haul my ass down the street. So
it's okay. We have a long week next week to hang out and see each other. Very excited for inbound.
Back in a big way. It's going to be sick. Sleepovers and stuff.
Right? Yeah. Thanks so much, man.
I appreciate you, dude. We'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Later.